In the very first interview I did for the Insight to Action podcast, I spoke with Ervin Laszlo, Professor Ervin Laszlo, who is the global leader in the awakening of humanity, the expansion of consciousness, human consciousness, which is really another word for it could be mindset, which and certainly in the business world is better understood. There's a huge opportunity for business to step up to a better stance of leadership, but it can't happen unless the consciousness shifts. And of course, the results of Brexit and the election of Donald Trump and the follow-up steps that companies like Exxon are taking to small agencies that have typically provided the check and balance for traditional thinkers, tell us that we've got to act more quickly. We've got to pay attention. In this conversation, I'm speaking not just with Ervin Laszlo, but I'm also speaking with Chris Laszlo, his son. So I hope you enjoy it. My name is Donna Jones, and I'm your host of the program. The middle of summer in July of 2016, the Tri-Center Conference took place in Lucca, Italy, to talk about the new paradigm in business and leadership. With me today is Chris Laszlo, the Chuck Fowler Professor of Businesses and Agents of World Benefit, and the Executive Director of the Fowler Center as well, and also Ervin Laszlo, who is the founder of the Club of Budapest and heads up the Institute of New Paradigm Research. So we're here to talk about what happened in Italy in the middle of the summer and why it's important to business right now. Welcome to the program, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start. Why these conversations and why now?
The goal was to invite a multidisciplinary group of leaders to learn from each other about how we want to create a world that works for 100% of humanity and all life on Earth. That was the noble goal of this event. It was sponsored by 3 centers, the Laszlo Institute for New Paradigm Research in Bagni di Lucca, which was the host organization. That's my father's organization. And then the Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And then finally, the ITEA Institute, which is a family business institute that is based in Shanghai, China, and is closely linked to efforts to increase well-being and new consciousness, what we will call new consciousness in business worldwide. So these 3 organizations got together with this design of bringing together, when I say multidisciplinary, it was primarily from 4 disciplines. It was from the biological and physical sciences was one domain. Consciousness research was another domain. The business management was a third domain. And then medicine, health, and well-being was a 4th domain. And I think the idea was that there are pretty disruptive changes in how each of those domains apprehends the nature of reality, and that all 4 areas are moving in the direction of seeing reality as more profoundly interconnected and conscious and coherence producing, if we could put it that way.
Yeah, more unified look, really.
More unified, a more unified view of the world, a more unitary view of the world. We were about 40 individuals who met for 3 days together in a more retreat format. And then on the 4th day, there was a summit where we shared the findings of the retreat with a larger and more public group. And so this design was really a way to deepen our collective understanding of what is reality, what is consciousness, and what lies at the core of health and well-being. In some ways, all of that with the objective of understanding how we can strengthen business as an agent of world benefit. So what is it about the new sciences? What is it about consciousness research? What is it about what we know about the roots of well-being that can help us influence the world of business so that business, the purpose of business becomes agency for world benefit rather than the paradigm that has existed in business in the past. So I'll stop here. And Dad, would you want to add to that at this stage?
Well, I just want to add that the reason that why I think I and the Institute got involved in this from the very beginning, even though we are not a management or a business organization, but a science research organization, is because the new paradigm that we are working on has applications to the real world, which is not directly our business, but our business is to bring this paradigm, as Christopher was saying, spell it out sufficiently so that business people can do themselves the job of figuring out how to make use of it. What this paradigm does is give a substance, verifiable, confirmable substance to intuitions and ideas that are already surfacing at the leading edge of civil society, and also, I think, in the mind of more insightful and open business people, which Christos has just been talking about, like the connectedness, the oneness of all elements of the world, not only the world that we have created, but the world as a whole. So the reason we want to get involved is because we need to promote, I think, in our collective best interest, more collaborative, more open and community-oriented mindset and goal setting in business. We could go to some lengths, if you like, in my next intervention, my next time I'll talk about something that the problems are. I just want to say now that business is a very important, perhaps the major factor in creating or making those choices that could lead either to a better future or to a very poor, probably collapsing kind of a future. And that for that factor to operate, it has to change its mind, as it were. The mindset or consciousness change or paradigm change or whatever word we use, but there needs to be a change at the very roots of the way business operates. And that calls not just for figuring out some better practices to face this or that problem, but that calls for rethinking the very nature of business, the goals of business. And that kind of rethinking is that we have been trying to promote in this event with business people from Europe and North America and China.
Thank you. What kinds of problems does consciousness solve? Because I know when you put out the word consciousness in business, they think, oh, it's impractical and it's theoretical and it's got nothing to do with my day-to-day routine. Couldn't be further from the truth. We know that because there's a huge gap in perception between surviving as a business and achieving the accomplishment of being business as an agent of world benefit. So what does consciousness do that creates, inside that worldview, inside a more unified worldview that we need now?
Yeah, if you think of consciousness as just a phenomenon of brain activity, so the result of firing of neurons and axons, that reinforces a view of human beings as separate and isolated, what the existentialists called the bounded being. When you start to see consciousness as a property of all life on Earth, and perhaps a property of the universe itself, that connects and unites us, not just metaphorically, but that there's a science-based view that says we are literally connected, both energy and information in a physicalist way, and consciousness in a spirit way, we're connected. That changes how we end up thinking about ourselves, so that experiencing the world that way leads people, or that's at least a hypothesis, that it leads people to be more empathetic and more compassionate, to seeing themselves as one with the world, so that there's a shift from ego, what Donna, you have talked about before, as being more ego-based views of integral consciousness, to the more shared we vision of the unified consciousness that my father has spoken about in his many books. And finally, I think that this new shift in consciousness, or new view of consciousness, allows us to be more coherent in our interactions with others and with nature, because it accepts the possibility that we are connected with through what is often called anomalous experiences like telepathy and precognition and other forms of what are called anomalous experiences, where there appears to be non-local instant connectivity in just our consciousness. So it's part of repainting the story about who we are as human beings and the nature of the world we live in.
I look now at this point at consciousness not as the question of what is consciousness. I look at consciousness as the determining factor of how we see the world, of who we are, what the world is, and what we can do in the world. In other words, consciousness for me in this practical context is the mindset, is the totality of our presumptions, assumptions, intuitions, as well as information about the world and about each other and about the possibilities in this world and the dangers and the opportunities as well. Now, if you look at it in this way, then you have to look at why do we need to change our perspective. Just a very, very brief catalog. What have we got today in the world? We have got climate change, we have freak weather patterns, we have a pollution of the lands and the seas, we have increasing poverty, we have out-of-hand religious fanaticism, we have massive migration, we have national governments who are fearful and unable to act because they are overpowered by civil groups, by fanaticism, by local competitive groups. We have interminable local wars. We have a whole series of failed states, the widening gap between rich and poor. We can go on and on and on. What we have got is an unsustainable world. And this world, if it would continue like that, it's bound to lead to increasing crisis. We are seeing the increase in crisis. It's not by chance that we have extremist political leaders coming to power, that we have these political leaders are talking about war and violence, whether they are war to wage it on poverty, it's a war on poverty, it's a war on terror. It want to do war and want to do act through violence and almost everything that all the problems that we have. And we have a business community at the same time that is still dominated by the old paradigm leaders, and as Donna mentions, that's what's holding up the progress. But there are, of course, new paradigm leaders which you have to reinforce and to support. But the old paradigm is still what is good for business is for business. Is not the question of what is good for humanity or for the rest. So it's competition. Competition, as Porter has been saying all along, is the main goal of everything. And that's the main spring of everything. But competition for what? Competition only for the benefit of business itself. I mean, I know these are the things that Chris is saying and doing and teaching and publishing. But I just want to emphasize, we need to change the mentality of business. And to me, a consciousness change means the change of the consciousness of business leaders and influential groups, whether they are within business or outside or lobbyists or pressure groups or whatever. We need to change that mentality. Otherwise, we are in real danger of exacerbating this crisis and leading to a point where they become either fully or practically or almost irreversible. That's a grave danger, and that is facing us right now.
One of the obvious pressures that's on companies right now, and hence the question mark around whether the narcissistic leaders that are at this executive level of a number of significant companies, is they're simply dying faster. Companies are dying faster. They're not adapting to this increasingly complex world. And so what that means is you've got leaders stepping in who hopefully moving up, who have to have the understanding and the capacity to witness the deep dynamics inside a company. And you cannot do that unless you have a much wider set of skills. Now, in your conversations in Italy, what kinds of skill sets emerged as being tools or allies for any executive in this process of transformation?
Some of the consequences for business of the world that my father just described are that young people particularly feel disengaged in the workplace. And they feel disengaged, we know from many different sources and surveys. They feel disengaged because when the purpose of business is just about serving business or the primacy of shareholder value, then particularly these younger generations are not willing to commit fully to their work. They're not as creative. They're not as collaborative. They're not as authentic in the workplace. And we know that the cost of this is huge. And that's a real pressure for business. The Wall Street Journal estimated that it costs the U.S. economy $450 to $550 billion a year to have this kind of disengagement in the workplace. And again, we know that primarily the source of disengagement is a lack of attention to individual well-being, a lack of alignment of values to something that a greater purpose in business, and a lack of meaning in the workplace. So a lot of the pressures on business today are, frankly, market-driven. They're not just ethical. They're also ethical. Clearly, we want business people to be behaving in ways that are supporting a better outcome for future generations and that are just seen as being the right thing to do. But it's also true that behavior that ignores the welfare and well-being of employees, of environmental groups, of local communities, of suppliers, of customers, and so on, are leading to increased risks, increased costs, loss of market share, because consumers want to buy products today that are seen as being sourced responsibly, produced responsibly, used responsibly, and disposed of responsibly. And then there are a growing number of market opportunities like going into renewable energy or water desalination, and in just so many different areas of business today are devoted to coming up with solutions to local and global problems. And then there's a lot of brand value as well in being seen as doing the right thing. So I think for all these reasons, we're really starting to see businesses, there is a shift, there's a move of the needle here towards business as a force for good instead of just profits in a way that somehow limits the worst damage.
I'm going to pick up on that because one of the things that I know I've written about, and I think a number of us have been writing about, is that the idea of reaching your quarterly targets is just completely uninspiring, hence the high levels of disengagement, because that doesn't do anything for anybody. But if you do a 10x kind of Google level moonshot goal, like address some of the problems, Ervin, that you described earlier, pick any one of them. It doesn't matter which one, but pick it up. It's got to be big. It's got to be bigger than anything the company could ever aspire to achieve. Put that forward and say, that's what we're here. That's why we exist. Watch what happens. I think those are the places where, so one of the, part of the toolkit then is think big, just think massively large and think in terms of accomplishing something that you couldn't in your wildest imagination believe is possible, like tackling some of the effects of climate change or poverty, whatever it happens to be, whatever level it is.
There's a question of having recipes, of having sort of instructions to do this or to that. Those can be very useful and important, but they're basically short-term patch-ups of issues. In the long term, we either develop a more human, collective, community-oriented mentality, or we face, like the old saying, it's either hang together or we hang separately, So it's time to begin to hang together. What I'm suggesting to you is what is coming about is really a recognition that fundamentally we are not just individuals being here for our own personal short-term benefit. We are something else, and members of a wider community. And this has always been present in the spiritual communities and systems. Nice topic for conversation on weekends and so on, but it has not really penetrated the world of business until now. Maybe it's beginning to penetrate. But what we need is this total rethinking of our entire situation, of our entire presence, our identity. And that is not just rethinking, I would say it's also refeeling. Have this aha experience. Yes, I am something else, different than what I was, what I thought I was. And the world is different from what I thought it was. Because if we don't do this rethinking, we are going to have this increasing problem that nobody, as Donna says, can solve alone. No company can solve, no government can solve alone. So we either, hang together or we hang separately, as I said. We must develop a new concept, a new sense, a new gut feeling of the world. And that it seems to be idealistic, seems to be, okay, that's very nice to talk about it, but Monday morning we have to get down to the bottom line. But the question is, what is the bottom line? Is it just to make money for the shareholders? Is there something else? And this is why Chris is talking about business as an agent of global benefit. We have to have a different mentality, because if that mentality doesn't change, I don't see government changing it. I don't see any other group being powerful enough to change it. Business leaders, if they develop this mentality which is spreading in the world, but mostly among younger people, if they can keep that, develop that mentality on the leading edge of business, then I think change would come about. Idealistic, perhaps, too optimistic, perhaps, but I don't see an alternative.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I was born with the capacity to see systems. That's how I came in. And so it's taken a long time to understand what the world looks like when you just look at a single point, like shareholder value, as opposed to understanding the interaction and the dynamics that make all things possible. So really what we're talking about then in this new worldview is moving from looking at things as isolated from everything else and seeing them as part of a interactive self-creation, self-organizing system. That's not a small jump in worldview. Any observations come out of the conversations in Italy that would help executives see things differently, see themselves in this world differently?
Well, let me make a comment on what my father was speaking about. I think that there's a growing recognition that changing consciousness is the highest point of leverage for transforming leadership in business. And this is something, just to be as factual as possible, this is something my father has been saying since at least the early 1990s when he founded the Club of Budapest. And he called it, planetary consciousness, then more led by scientists and artists at the time. But it's also something that was reinforced in a 1997 piece by Donella Meadows called Places to Intervene in a System. And if you look at these 12 ways to intervene in a system in increasing effectiveness, she talks about the things that you can do in complex systems to cause transformative change. And some of them are, changing incentive systems, changing operating systems, changing, the way teams work and so on. But as you get to the top, the highest leverage points of change, the second one from the top is change mindset. And there's been a lot of discussion for years in business about changing mindset. But the number one place to intervene in a system, in a complex system, in her 1997 view, is a change in paradigm. In other words, how we see the nature of reality, or the nature of the world. And I think that's where this latest work or body of work my father has pulled together has the potential to make the kind of difference in business that we all want to see. The rest of the efforts in business to try to make a better business case for reducing fossil fuels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions are good and important, but they're not big enough to impact the challenges that we face. And it's only by having this fundamental change in or a paradigm change in how we experience the world and our role in the world and who we are in the world that we can expect leaders to start behaving differently, not because they've been analytically convinced that it's smarter to take care of, their fellow citizens or communities and the environment, but because that becomes who they are. That's how they experience the world. That's how they choose to act, because it's it becomes just the natural way to act once you are in this new integral map of reality. And Dad, I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that integral map of reality, or
fine. Well, without getting into technical details, just one basic idea. We are a complex system. We are individually a complex system, because Donna was talking about systems, so let me pick up on that. And we are collectively a complex system, many complex systems pulled together into a super complex system. Okay? And what we know about these systems is that they are going contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, which is to run down toward higher and higher levels of inertness, of entropy. These complex systems maintain themselves in equilibrium, by constantly taking down free energy, processing it, and using it themselves. Now, why I'm saying that? Because if you recognize that our world is a system of this kind, which requires that all its elements work together in order to maintain that system in the dynamic state, which doesn't go down to the most inert state, was the most equilibrium state, where toward which all physical processes are moving, are attracting. And in that kind of a system requires that all elements of the system are coherent. Coherence in this sense, Chris was talking about it, means that all parts, all elements are in communication with every other. They exchange information and they respond and react to each other. And together, out of this reaction comes an overall system that maintains itself. Now, look at the current situation in the world. There are 144 governments or more, tens of thousands of major businesses, as you wish to count them, I don't know. But how many civil groups and languages and other splinter groups? These are all operating on their own. Now, if they operate only with the idea of competing for their own benefit, then what they are doing is they're acting as cancer cells in the overall organism, which are only multiplying themselves without regard to what happens to the rest. So it simply is not possible to maintain an interacting, interdependent system such as we have created on this planet without all major components of that system cooperating, working together. Then those kind of things like all-in-all competition only for benefit of your shareholders, for only moving onto your own national interest, this mistaken decisions like the Brexit, for example, pulling out instead of trying to reform the system. I agree that it doesn't work so perfectly as we would like to, the EU, but not pulling out from it, but trying to work inside it to make it work better. We can't operate separately. We can't do it. And so this is a very clear-cut case. Ask yourself, what is your business or any business? Is it simply there for its own benefit, or is it there for the joint, for the collective benefit? If there's any doubt about it, we have to reform that system because it is in danger. It risks becoming a cancer. That makes sense. I think that will make sense to anybody who looks at it. We need a system where every part collaborates with every other, not becoming uniform. I just should add that. Not the question of being the same, but being complementary, working together. You don't expect your cells in your brain to operate as the cells in your bone, as vice versa, or organs. We all have to have our individuality, but our ultimate goals, our ultimate effect of our existence has to be the maintenance of the system of which we are a part. This is what happens in nature. Every species on Earth exists in a way that permits other species around it to survive. Of course, we all eat each other to some extent in nature as well. But beyond that, there is a larger framework within which an ecosystem, a population system, a multi-population system maintains itself and its environment. And if that is destroyed, then all the systems go down in that environment. So ask yourself, is business such a collaborative, productive part, or is it becoming something which is so self-concerned that it's in danger of taking apart, pulling down the overall coherence of the system? That is the crux of the question.
And a brilliant metaphor, because it gives anyone listening to this program a way to stand back and evaluate their own company and their own role in their company as well. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Some of your listeners may wonder, well, what's new and different about this approach in business or in management thinking and practice as far as the role of business in society? And I think there are a couple of things that are really worth highlighting. The first is that most efforts in this area around corporate social responsibility and corporate sustainability have studied the changes in the relationship between organizations and their competitive environments. So like the shared value work of Michael Porter. And so that's, to use some of the language that my father has worked with a lot in evolutionary biology, that's between the meso and the macro world. There's very little that has been done in the management literature to incorporate the micro world of the individual. And I think that's part of what we're doing is we're saying you really have to look at transformation at all three levels. The micro foundations of flourishing enterprise, as well as the relationship between the enterprise and its greater environment. So the micro, meso, and macro view. That's new. So, it's not just a strategist view of how value gets created when companies pay attention to society and the environment. It's also looking at the micro foundations of leadership, of leaders, and who leaders are being. The second is that there's not been much discussion of the kind my father has put forward, suggesting really that it's fundamentally about a new ontological paradigm. So the shift from shareholder value to a stakeholder value view is it's an incremental change. It's just within the old paradigm. You're just moving from efficiency to effectiveness, and perhaps from maximizing value for shareholders to creating value for shareholders and stakeholders. But fundamentally, it's still in that old paradigm that business is there to make money for business and for the owners of business. So if we're going to transform the role of business in society so that it becomes an agent for good, it becomes an agent for world benefit, we have to cross this ontological divide. And on the other side of the ontological divide is the new scientific paradigm that my father has developed and written. And Dad, perhaps you want to say something about this latest book that's just coming out.
Well, that is a book of 358 pages, so I can't say too much about it in a couple of words. Just to say that the title tells it all. The title is a question: what is reality? And then, of course, the inside is an argument that reality is just as Chris has been discussing it now. Reality is a evolving set of clusters of what I call vibrations, because that is ultimately, we are not made of matter, we are made of vibrating energy. These vibrating energies acting together and creating a world that evolves and that becomes more and more one. And that ultimately in that world, consciousness is a real factor, not just something produced by the brain, and it isn't even just something that completely disappears when the brain is turned off, from NDEs and OBEs and after this experiences and all that sort of thing. Then there is a way in which consciousness can persist even without a functioning brain. But that's the sidelight, but it's a very important one, of course. The main point being that we have to do with a world in which the joining together and collaboratively creating larger wholes is the major element since the Big Bang. since neutrons and electrons have accepted, neutrons and protons accepted an electron and created the hydrogen nucleus, since then, the world has been building up by bringing more and more diverse elements into collaborative, cooperative relationships, into coherence. And that we are part of that. And our consciousness is part of that. But we have to realize it and not just let it happen. We have to act like we really are part of this evolving world.
Couldn't agree with you more. I know for myself, your writing, Ervin, in the 90s saved my day multiple levels and multiple times, because I would be going into organizations and ultimately came to be calling it organizational blueprints. You'd go into a company, you'd go into situations or teams or whatever, and it's almost like you could be working with them, but you'd see a shadow of what was putting pressure on these teams sitting in the background, and nothing tangible, obviously, but a sensation that there, of what the belief system was that sat behind these teams. And I eventually called it organizational blueprints, because I would go into an organization, and if people were hard on each other, and I mean really hard on each other, meaning high levels of conflict, and it was just bad news, then you would look back in the organization and find it was actually worse at some point, or had continued. It was part of what I called, as I say, these blueprints. And so I interviewed Roland McCready, research scientist for HeartMath Institute, in about 6 years ago, maybe more, on that, because it was a phenomenal I'd witnessed. It was something I didn't understand. And of course, you don't have the research to back you up, but you know what you're seeing. And if you know that, it's so much easier to work with it, because all of a sudden now you know what you're doing is really working with energy. And how you work with it must be done very intentionally, very consciously. Otherwise, you can do more harm than good. So I really appreciate the conversations that both we're having today, but also the ones that will follow, and also follow with the book you're about to publish. And then, Chris, are you doing another book as well?
Yes, I am. It's Quantum Leadership. The subtitle is New Consciousness in Business. And it's contracted. We have an advanced contract with Stanford University Press for it. It should be released in early 2019.
And Ervin, when's your book out?
October 4 of this year, by Select Books New York and through the Amazon and various other platforms.
An honor to have you both on the program, especially at the same time. Thank you both very much. Is there anything you want to add?
I just have a very good feeling about having this kind of programs, this kind of discussions, because it means that there is an awakening within the community that is advising business people, which we need so very badly. So it's wonderful to have met Donna. I have met Christopher for some time already. It's nice to be in this company. So thanks again for this initiative.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Donna. These are valuable programs and worth committing and investing time in.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ervin, very much. Look forward to seeing what happens when your books come out, and to chatting with you again at that point. For more information, do they go to the Club of Budapest, Ervin, or do you want people to, is there a particular place that people should look to?
Well, they can just Google or get on the Laszlo Institute for New Paradigm Research. There's, on the Laszlo Institute, there's a website.
I might add, just on that if you actually Google Ervin's name on Amazon, you'll see the range of work that's been involved in my work in organizations when I go in. What I learned from your writing, Ervin, and I'd like to share this because it meant so much to me, is I would see dynamics in the groups I was working with, or in the organizations I was working with, or the leadership, or whatever it happened to be. But then I learned to continually expand the system, because you've written about the cosmos, and it was an area of interest I'd long had. I was intuitively drawn to it. So my questions when I'd be working in an organization is, what's going on that no one's looking at, that's having an effect on these people and on this system? And that question alone brought insight that I would not have gained if I had just made assumptions around what the people were, about their behavior or about their belief system. So I wanted to mention that, because it improved mastery of my own craft in helping and supporting the transformation of thinking and of how people work together in companies and organizations. And Chris, we know you were writing a lot sooner than that. I mean, you were writing about shared value long before Michael Porter knew how to say it. So tell our listeners where to go for more information on that.
I think they can go to the Fowler Center for Business Association to World Benefit at Case Western Reserve University. There has a lot of resources, including resources on emotional intelligence from a faculty member, Richard Boyatsis, on positive psychology and appreciative inquiry from David Cooper-Ryder and Ron Fry, and other colleagues of mine there.
All right. Thanks both very much.
It was a pleasure.
You are one of the signs of hope in these difficult times.
Well, I tell you, you've given me hope, because there were years way back in the beginning when I would go in that I thought, oh my gosh. And Chris knows that I dropped everything in 2003 just to focus on ramping up the level of leadership to match you could almost like you could see the planetary change going on. I call it like a screensaver, and no one was looking at the screensaver, and I was just like, oh my, so that's what prompted me to do this. And there's been a huge commitment involved in doing it, as both of you can appreciate. Things don't always go according to plan when you take on big projects like shifting consciousness in business, but we are starting to see the turn, thankfully. And we're starting to see more and more interest, and we're starting to get better. I think our conversations across the board are getting better at identifying and activating who's ready. I get calls from millennials basically saying, what's going on? Are they afraid? Do they not see? What do I do? So they're asking these questions, and at the same time, they're stepping back into the system. And so there's just a short window of time to catch them before they get sucked into the vortex of conformity that's mind-numbing.
Yes.
There you go.
Wonderful, but it's to say the least.
What was the follow-up to this one?
Oh, you mean the Tri-Center meeting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have one planned for Cleveland next June. And by the way, Donna, if you want to already pencil that in, June 14th to 16th, 2017, will be the fourth Global Forum for Business Destination to World Benefit on the Case Western Reserve University campus. And it will have one of the four tracks will essentially be this track that we have spent discussing on this podcast.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I mean, my own research has taken me through all four threads that you talked about in Lucca, because I reached a point where I thought, well, people aren't going to be able to create unless they're healthy. So what's going to take to make them healthy? And that was both looking at them individually and then using, applying epigenetics. And that's where the organizational blueprint conversation started as well, was just looking at what's the container that creates health for people. And then how mindfulness impacts their capacity to make better decisions. So, all of those threads were all tracks that I've gone down. And so that's why the conversation looked so exciting. It looked like a lot of fun. So it'd be fun to do that in 2017.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. My hope is that the main thing you'll take away from this conversation is that your personal growth and evolution is absolutely pivotal to anything that can change on a global scale, particularly in terms of sustaining life for all species, humanity included. This is a time more than ever where it is a chance to use adversity, to use conflict, to use the collisions that diversity creates to really reach out and hold compassion, hold empathy, make that extra step. You can certainly reach out to me on my website, FromInsightToAction.com, or through LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. And I do, of course, work with people who are in environments that are new and fresh and who really looking to expand their consciousness skills so that they can navigate better. Now we're going to close this program with a track from my friend Jamie Schnetzler in Santa Cruz, California. So I hope you'll enjoy it.